Jack Mallory dropped out of college to join the U.S. Army in 1966. 3 years later, he served in the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in Vietnam as a Psywar Civic Action Officer. Jack finished college after serving and received his PhD in anthropology from the Pennsylvania State University in 1984. He's now retired from his education career and spends his free time volunteering for the VA Medical Center and paddling the waters of New Hampshire. Jack's story is about his time in Vietnam and a ghost that he's lived with ever since.
This had been cooking in my mind for years and years, and the writing workshop brought it out. It's entitled The Little Girl at My Door. She doesn't knock. She comes through the door uninvited. I've read hundreds of books about Vietnam, history, analysis, memoir, novels. They don't explain the little girl. I don't understand little girls. Both of my kids are boys. It took a lot of time for them to learn to come knock before coming in. She'll never learn. She's dead. She's been dead for as long as I've known her, but she still comes in without being asked, like the rest of the war. I was going from LZ Andy into the Vietnamese base in An Loc. Right outside the wire, I noticed several children. Something wasn't right. I told my Jeep driver to head over there. Half a dozen kids were gathered around a young girl, maybe 10 years old, lying under a tree. She wasn't visibly injured, but pale, motionless, and dead. Through my interpreter, her friends told me she'd been up in the tree gathering gathering branches for firewood. She'd triggered a booby trap set by the local Viet Cong, a grenade without a pin, placed in a tin can with a wire strung across the road, hoping that the antenna on an American vehicle would hit the wire, yank the grenade from the can, and detonate it. A few minutes earlier, the little girl had detonated the grenade herself. She was apparently untouched, except for a small hole not much bigger than my thumbnail, right in the center of her chest. She bled out internally. Not my fault, not directly our fault. During my year in Vietnam and the years after, as the futility of the war became increasingly apparent, she was a reminder, a refutation of any attempt to justify the war with geopolitical bullshit or the trivia of whose fault it was. She was a dead little girl in the wrong place at the wrong time, killed in a war that didn't have to happen. And because I played a tiny part in the making of that war, she came to my door. I had friends who died in the war. I may have killed North Vietnamese soldiers in the war, but she's the one at my door. The little girl is the reason I go outdoors into nature. She follows me there too sometimes, but there's a lot more out there, a lot more to take my mind off her and the rest of the war. There are things to listen to, things to see, a lot to focus on. She fades into the background, sometimes almost disappears completely. The camera helps now too. I didn't take many pictures in Vietnam, and very few of those survived the war and the decades and divorces since. Some memories have survived. I remember green and brown, jungle and dust, mud during the rainy season. I don't remember beauty. The few photographs and my memories are of destruction. I was with the 11th Armored Cavalry, assault vehicles, tanks. Everywhere we went, we destroyed. Farmers' fields, rubber plantations, jungle. Green and brown, the colors of bodies as they decay into the earth. My memories are green and brown. Very little stands out, no bright colors. In the jungle or in the rubber, it was dark, almost gloomy. And no animals, nothing alive except a few villagers and the enemy. We were an armored unit. Our lightest combat vehicle weighed 12 tons, our heaviest over 50. Where we went, the ground shook. Everyone, everything knew we were coming. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese had plenty of time to get out of the way or get ready. Jungle critters just disappeared. Today, I know jungle and forest as home to countless creatures. Working in Central America, I've seen toucans and macaws, howlers and spider monkeys, snakes and iguanas. In the woods and on the waters of New England, I see deer and moose, snakes and snappers, ospreys and eagles. When I'm outdoor in New Hampshire, bright colors are everywhere. There are the needles and leaves of the mixed forest in the summer, and in autumn, much of that green becomes yellow and orange and red. In the winter, the shine of the ice and snow can be blinding. Year-round, there are the blacks and grays and silvers of basalt and granite. The animals of the woods and waters are further distraction from the little girl. On the trails and on the waves, I've seen animals as small as spiders and as big as moose. I've spotted a young mink curiously spotting me, and harlequin ducks against the brilliance of the ice. Much of my hiking and paddling is done alone, but I often share my outside time with someone who understands my need for the woods and water. For her own reasons, she also finds peace and joy in the natural world. She doesn't see the little girl, but she understands why I do. When I came back from Vietnam, I began to work with Vietnam veterans against the war, living in Washington, organizing opposition to the war. Urban life, consumed by demonstrations, negotiations, politics. The war was a monolithic evil. Personal details were lost in its immensity. And the Rolling Rock, Boone's Farm, and pot helped keep the little girl and other details at a distance. After 2 furious years, I burned out on anti-war work, even as the war burned out. But then there was school, a BA, and graduate school, and field work, and a dissertation, and jobs. A couple of marriages, career changes, kids. In and around the rest of life, I read about the war, those hundreds of books, trying to make sense out of it. I graduated from cheap beer and wine to cheap scotch. Decades after the war ended, it all fell apart. I retired and read more about the war and had another scotch and still couldn't make any sense of it. My marriage crumbled. I had more scotch until even I knew I was in trouble. I quit drinking, and a veteran friend suggested PTSD and help from the VA. It took a while, but sober, retired, divorced, in therapy, I began to understand what the little girl was doing in my room. And I could also begin to understand the importance of the outdoors. I had the time to be both outdoors and think about why, to understand that the outdoors and my camera were a refuge from the little girl. In 2001, I returned to Vietnam with my family, one of my boys about the same age as the little girl when she was killed. When I saw young Vietnamese children, I often thought about her, about how her life might have gone if she hadn't been gathering firewood that morning. Other scenes of Vietnam at peace were reminders of lives that had survived the war and lives that have been built since. Vietnam seems full of color today. My trip photos are full of greens brighter than the greens I remember. There's the scarlet and gold of the Buddhist temple, the pink of market-bound pigs, children in their clean, bright school clothes. People living their daily lives help me understand that Vietnam is a living place with living people, not a war and a little girl lying dead in the woods. After nearly a decade since I started thinking more clearly, understanding what she and the outdoors mean in my life, I realize there's been a change. Like my understanding of Vietnam as a living place, I can see nature the same way, as a world of its own. I now hike and paddle to enjoy the woods and water, more important than their value as an escape. I guess I'm ambivalent about her. Would I want her to go away? Never come through my door again? No, she's part of my life. She's not always welcome. She's not always comfortable to be around. It reminds me of part of my life that I might wish had never happened, but that shaped my life in a way that made me who I am. She sent me into the woods and onto the water, and for that I will be forever grateful.